Welcome to our session. Good afternoon. Thanks for being here. I do want to mention that we're going to be leaving time for questions at the end, and that our wonderful facilitator, Susanna, is going to be helping out by taking your questions from the chat and popping them into the chat here in our Zoom meeting. So please add any questions or comments or thoughts to the chat feature in Pathable, and we will try to get to them at the end as much as possible. And we're going to wait till the end to do that. So another thing that I want to point out very quickly before we introduce ourselves is thank you for participating in our poll. And the question was, what is your comfort level with Counter 5? And I tried to grab the numbers right before we let y'all in. And we had about 12% who said very comfortable. So that's great. We have some experts in the house. And then 34% said somewhat comfortable. And then 36% said, it's okay. So that was the largest group of people who are kind of, still figuring things out. About 10% said uncomfortable, which is fine. And about 8% said, what the heck is Counter 5? So if you weren't sure what it is, you're in the right place because you're about to find out. Okay, so I'm Erin Gallagher, and I am the e-resources librarian at the University of Florida in lovely Gainesville, Florida.
I'm Pauline Bickford-Duane. I'm an electronic resources specialist.
I am Doug Kiker. I am an e-resource specialist as well.
And I'm Beth Savoyski, also an electronic resources specialist.
Thanks, y'all. So we're here today to talk about our otherworldly experiences with Counter 5, the Counter 5 Code of Practice. And to start, we'll tell you a little bit about the University of Florida. It is a very large public research one university located in Gainesville, which is the kind of north central part of the state. We serve around 50,000 students at any given time, and we have 7 library branch sites that support a massive diversity of programs from health sciences to fine arts to law. Our department, which is the Acquisitions and Collection Services Department, is housed in the Smathers Library, which is the oldest library building on campus, and I think the loveliest. It's also the one that you're seeing on our initial slide here. And our department is responsible for acquisition and management of all print and e-collection activities, but more specifically, our unit, which is the e-resources unit, manages the life cycle of all e-resources, and that goes from trials all the way to assessment. As far as our usage stats work, the goal of our stats collection is to provide an ongoing mechanism for quantitative assessment of subscription e-resources. And while we consult usage stats ourselves for our own reporting and assessment purposes, our primary audience are our library colleagues who have responsibilities for selecting materials in various subject areas. And a large part of our audience is our collections committee, which is comprised of selectors from each one of our budget centers. So they all have access to these stats. They consult them frequently in line with assessment efforts. And I will now let Beth talk about our project.
Okay, hello again, everybody. I'm going to give you a quick overview of our annual usage stats collection process, and specifically how we tackled it in 2019, because that's the first year we started obtaining Counter 5 stats. I'm going to tell you the tools and resources we use and give you an overview and show you a screenshot of what we call our trackers. So every year, as I said, we get our usage stats for the prior year. And this is very important because it gives us a number that we could then calculate a cost per use for all of our subscriptions, which is really helpful to our collections librarians. In 2018 and prior to that year, we were getting stats in Counter 4, and we were really familiar with Counter 4, like your JR1 reports and your DB1 and so on. With 2019, we wanted to dip our toes into Counter 5, not really just dip, but like dive in. So really understand it. The reports were different, the names were different. So we really had a big job ahead of us. So what we did was we started to meet in February of 2020 in person when we were still working in the office. We wanted to demystify it and kind of understand Counter 5 as a group. So what we did to do that was we watched some videos that are on YouTube. There's some Counter 5 foundation class videos. And we consulted the Counter 5 codes of practice and the FAQ section that's in there. In March of 2020, we started working remotely. So we had to communicate in new ways. Some of the ways were Teams and Zoom, and we relied more heavily on email because we're no longer across the hall from each other. So And as far as that went, we started to communicate more heavily with Zoom on a weekly basis starting in April to kind of discuss as a group the challenges we were seeing with our Counter 5 reports and any issues, any things that didn't make sense or any things that were unexpected. We worked together as a group to kind of untangle these things. So I just want to give you an idea of this annual project. It's really large. We have approximately 1,000 subscriptions. So, and with that, we maintain a lot of administrative logins at publishers' websites to get these usage reports. So we have about 285 accounts that we maintain. One challenge that we see sometimes is we can't get into these accounts or we have to create an account. So it's usually pretty easy to fix. And once that's done, it's more easy to do it the next year to get in there and pull the report. Once we were in there, we saw that not every publisher had Counter 5 yet, and that was fine. We would just pull Counter 4 and make a note of that. The place that we present the usage data to our colleagues is on something called a tracker. A tracker is really just an Excel spreadsheet. It's a really large spreadsheet. And Erin mentioned that we share this. It's in SharePoint. We share it with our colleagues in our department and with any librarian in our system that makes collections decisions, because it's really valuable information for them. We also keep the raw usage reports in a shared network drive that we have organized by publisher name, and we have over 250 folders with multiple years of usage, generally going back to 2016, but I'm sure there's some that are older than that. So back to this tracker, this is an example tracker that goes along with our theme of close encounters of the fifth kind. And it's pretty similar to a real tracker. We have 9 of these trackers for each budget center. Budget centers can be a physical library like the Marston Science Library, the Health Science Center Library, or it could be a subject-specific tracker like social sciences or humanities. These trackers are really useful. We look at them every day. Usually, and they were created in 2008 by our colleagues in the accounting and serials unit within our department. In 2018, we started adding usage data to these trackers because it was a great place to have this data. It's because, as you can see, we have cost data in here. So if you just add usage, you can add another column with a formula to get the cost per use. The trackers are more than usage also, like you can see here. We have all of our vendors on here for each subscription. We have the subscription periods. We have 2 years of cost data that we keep visible, 2 years of usage that we keep visible, and obviously the cost per use, and any usage notes, anything that's like little funky or any relevant information that we may need to share with others about the particulars of the usage. So in this case, there's an example here where we would note that we were only able to obtain Counter 4 for a certain title. Or sometimes counter compliance stats aren't available, so we would just make a note of that as well. And now I'm going to hand this off to Pauline, who's going to talk to you about some of the differences between Counter 4 and 5 and some of the specific challenges that we saw.
Thank you, Beth. So our approach for this project was to first determine which Counter 4 reports we had pulled for 2018 usage, and then which Counter 5 reports were their closest equivalent. Our goal was to standardize our reporting as much as possible so that our cost per use calculations and our trackers were reasonably comparable, both between 2 resources and between 2018 and 2019 for the same resource. So the reports we had most used in Counter 4 were the journal report, JR1, database report, DB1, book report, BR1 and BR2, and the platform report, PR1. We typically only used the platform report if that was our only option for usage statistics. We agreed to standardize the metrics that we collected for each of these types of reports. And previously, this was pretty simple to standardize. We would use record views or reporting period total. And with Counter 5, we found that the equivalent metrics we needed to use differed for each resource type. So for our journals, in the TRJ1 for Counter 5, we decided to use the metric total item requests. And the biggest difference we saw with these was that we were seeing a lower usage count with Counter 5 due to the fact that open access materials were no longer included in the number. For our databases, for the Counter 5 DRD1, we decided to use either total item requests or total item investigations. The biggest difference we saw with these was that abstracts and indexes only report search and investigation metrics and not item requests. So where in Counter 4, we had previously used the same metric across the board, just record views for all of our databases. In Counter 5, we needed to be a little more discerning based on the type of database. For our books, the TRB1, we would use unique title requests. And one thing we had to keep in mind with these was that the number of unique item requests was variable depending on how the publisher recorded usage. So if they recorded it at the title or the chapter level. And unique title requests was the metric that we used that would be more consistent. And then for our platform report, we decided to use unique item requests. So we faced a couple of challenges during this project, but overall this was such a large scale of a project to complete that the problems were a very small percentage of the total. But we did find that even the smallest problems required significant scrutiny, both because we were all learning Counter 5 and because of different vendors, different publishers, different resources. So we really relied on communication with our vendors and close examination of the Counter training materials. So in this first example here, we have the full text versus non-full text databases. We found that as we were pulling usage reports, some databases were either not showing up on Counter 5 reports when we generated a filtered report that only showed item requests, or if we did generate a full report, they would show only investigations and searches for the metrics. And a Counter 4 report from the same year showed record views for that database. So first we identified a few examples where this was happening. And the example we have here is race relations abstracts from EBSCO. So we have 262 record views in a 2019 Counter 4 report, but the only metrics showing in a Counter 5 report from the same time period are searches and item investigations. And previously, we had been looking for total item requests. So we solved this one by communicating with our vendors, revisiting the training materials, and discussing among ourselves the exact nature of an item request. And we came to the conclusion that for abstract or index databases that don't contain full text content, we're not going to see total item requests at all as a metric on a DRD1 report, because the total item requests are only counting full text item usage. So for our abstract and index databases, we needed to adjust our expectations and use total item investigations instead. A sub issue for us here with this challenge was that it's not always obvious which databases are full text and which are abstract or index. This one, you can see from the title that it's abstracts, but there are a number of cases where it's not so evident. So going forward, this is something that we're identifying and marking on our trackers in the usage notes field that Beth mentioned before. At the time of the project, we would determine this by regenerating the report without any filters or limits if we didn't see the database on the first pass. Next slide, please. So the second challenge we faced was significant numerical discrepancies between Counter 4 and Counter 5 reports for the same resource in the same year. So this example we have here is ProQuest Historical Newspapers. We have a combined subscription of these four, so we add up all the usage statistics to get one number. So here we have Christian Science Monitor, New York Times, Wall Street Journal, and Washington Post. And for a 2019 database report, we have 425 record views, while for a 2019 DRD1 Counter 5 report, we have 14,769 item requests, which is a pretty significant discrepancy. So to solve this one, we reached out to the folks at Counter, and we also communicated directly with ProQuest. We found that the discrepancy between the Counter 4 record views and the Counter 5 total item requests is because the definitions are not exactly equivalent between the two. And this was contradictory to a foundation class, a Counter Foundation class that we had watched on YouTube. But the reason we are not seeing an equivalent count between the Counter 4 and Counter 5 database reports is due to the limited scope of what record views amounted to in Counter 4. In Counter 4 times, databases were not typically full text, And so it's not really built to capture the range of full text activities that Counter 5 is able to capture. So in this case, unfortunately, these two numbers aren't really going to be comparable in terms of cost per use, but it is the most accurate metric for us to use going forward. So what we need to do is indicate this on our trackers and also communicate with our budget selectors to help them understand this big jump in numbers. So really throughout these challenges, communication was really critical. During our weekly unit meetings, we shared new problems like this with our team. And if it was a problem that the team couldn't solve, that's when we would reach out to our vendors for clarification. And then we would also discuss vendor responses as a team. Having multiple perspectives looking at the same email really helps to untangle any issues and inconsistencies that we came across. We also found that it was critical to get replies directly from our vendors. Sometimes there were unique reasons why a resource wasn't appearing in a report or why the numbers were really different between two reports. In one example with Gale, we had Times Digital Archive and a couple of other databases that weren't appearing on a Counter 5 report, but when we reached out to our representative, it was because they hadn't yet been migrated to a new platform. So the abstract index database solution didn't really apply in this case, and we wouldn't have known that if we hadn't reached out to them directly. So figuring out all these challenges was really helpful in developing a fairly comprehensive understanding of Counter 5, but that wasn't the end of the story because we also have a fair number of resources that don't offer counter compliance statistics at all. So I'll now pass it over to Doug, who can talk more about those examples.
Thank you, Pauline. Hi, this is Doug, and I'm going to talk a bit about what we did when we came across e-resources that did not have counter compliance statistics. Two of the budget centers that I manage are the business e-resources and the special collections and area studies e-resources. For the business e-resources, companies that we have subscriptions with often provide slick, kind of clean reports that are ready for their clients' use. But the problem is that the reports are designed less for the academic market and more for business usage and for the company employees that they're provided to. So what we have here on the screen is a slide. It's a slide that's an actual report for one of our advertising databases, the name of which has been changed to protect the innocent, but otherwise the numbers are real. And so the under the traffic stats category right there, you see the 4 different numbers that are descriptions that they're providing, and they've even provided a little legend there to explain what they are. And also you'll notice that it starts with Q3 of 2019, and that's clear as to when we pulled this report, because typically we're looking for the annual January 1 to December 31 statistics that match up with the counter reports. But this one was requested in June of 2019, so that's why it runs more on our budget year, which is July 1 to June 30. But so it fits in well with our payments. But this is not really what we're looking for. But we just have to be consistent with pulling this report from the same time each year. And really the important part of this slide is that you want to, ideally in consultation with our selector, the selector who would have selected this database, we need to decide about what the full text equivalent would be amongst all those categories. And with consultation with our advertising librarian, we came to the conclusion that probably the ads watched would be there at under the year-to-date 684. So that's what we would agree to use as the going forward. But it's really important to note that in the tracker and to be consistent with pulling that same metric each year. So if we could go to, actually, another thing about the business e-resources that I've often found that we do need to be aware and careful of the regular format changes and redesigns that some of the companies do with their content and their reports. They often come out with kind of new and improved data. So that makes it a little bit challenging to keep that metric consistent from year to year when they're changing the report itself. But so this next slide is I've pulled two titles. Again, the top one, Galaxia, is an actual resource, but we've changed the name, and it's from the special collections and area studies. And we have, so I've just sort of pulled the important columns from our tracker, and it's a resource type. It's an ebook package with some e-journal content, the amount paid and the usage, and then the cost per use. But the last column is the important one, where we really need to annotate the peculiarities about the resource, and it's not counter, that it's a, it's a resource that's based in Spain, so that may be why they're not counter compliant yet. And it uses a combination of ebook and e-journal queries. That's really the only thing in the report that we could use as a full text equivalent. So it's important to use that same queries metric each year. And then the next line is the advertising and space data library that I just showed you the report for. And it's the same way, it's not counter, and it's on a non-calendar year, July to June period. And we use the ads watched as the metric. So with that, I will hand it over to the microphone to our fearless leader, Erin Gallagher, and she has some concluding remarks about this continuing project.
Thanks, y'all. So looking ahead, because the work is never done, of course, on a practical level, we'll do this again at the beginning of 2021. We'll pull our 2020 calendar year stats and add the appropriate columns to our trackers in order to present our cost use and cost per usage to our main audience. But we also want to, look outside the practicalities a bit. And what we realize is that there's a lot of interest among our colleagues in usage statistics. They're very interested in this, but it seems very challenging to wrap their heads around, and also kind of mystical because they just see a number popped onto a tracker and they don't know where it came from or how that was generated. It's hard enough for us to wrap our heads around. So what we're planning to do is to conduct an all library staff information session, and we'd like to focus on demystifying usage stats. That's actually a team goal for our unit for 2021, and it's in line with our department and unit goals to illuminate the value of e-resources work to our user group, which is our library employees. Another thing coming down the pike is we are involved in a statewide migration. All of the 40 Florida state institutions are migrating to the ALMA integrated library system. And we hope that this presents opportunities for automating some stats harvesting and collection, and also for providing more robust analysis. So we're very hopeful in that front. We also find that the current state of our budgetary uncertainty means that our usage stats are more important than ever. They are going to be very important in the coming years as we potentially look to strategize around how to optimize our dwindling budgets. And because we had double hits to our budget from our institution and the state, because we are a state institution, this might mean that the worst is yet to come, though, fingers crossed. Thank you so much, everybody, for joining us. I believe that there are some questions in the chat that I am going to pull up now. Okay. So first of all, Lorraine, I'm so glad that you're here. So Lorraine Estelle actually works for Counter. She's awesome. She was super responsive to my questions. And even if they weren't worded very well, Lorraine, your responses were really wonderful and articulate and really helped us out. And Lorraine has included a link to the foundation classes, which even though we did mention that we found some information to be a bit contradictory, they were very, very helpful in our understanding of Counter 5. Okay, so someone asks, with the DB1 versus DRD1 example, what was the full range of full text activities that you left out of the Counter 4 report? Can I elaborate? Okay, so this is where I wish Lorraine could just jump in and answer, because I would have to look back through my notes to get the full answer to this question. If I remember correctly, the main discrepancy was that Counter 4 was not designed to pick up all full text activity, retrieval activity as robustly as Counter 5. And so I take that to mean things like downloading, reading online, anything where you are maybe downloading to an e-reader, any sort of activity where you are actually accessing the full text as opposed to just, a search results screen or a result click. So I know that that is not an incredibly adequate answer to this question. If my colleagues have anything to share, please feel free to jump in. But if not, I could follow up with you afterward, or maybe bring Lorraine in on this question. All right, so another question, will we convert data that's non-counter compliant into the closest counter metric in order to perform holistic reporting and analysis? Doug did touch on this, and the answer is yes. We, not in any sort of fancy data conversion way, but really what we're doing is whatever metric we can get from a vendor or publisher, if it's not counter compliant, we are adding that to the tracker. And so really what we try to do is find the equivalent, the metric they provide that's most equivalent to a full text usage or a full item usage. So that could be a data set, a streaming video, a archival item, an article, a book. A lot of these business databases have very really diverse content types. So whatever we can get that is most equivalent to a use that would have had to be paid for, and that is normally a full text retrieval of some kind of content item. So we do add that to the tracker and calculate cost per use that way. All right, so we have another question that I'm actually going to ask my colleagues to help with. How do packages or collections work on the tracker? There was mention of adding all stats together, but that was a 4-title bundle. So our larger package is different. I can kick things off. So yes, the larger packages are different. So for example, we subscribe to, hundreds and hundreds of titles from Springer, and we pay one lump sum for our Springer subscription. So our cost is just one big old lump sum. But we have, of course, title by title usage for all of those Springer titles. So what we do on the trackers, just to provide some sort of an idea of cost per use for our colleagues, is we do calculate that one big lump sum and the one big total usage number together to arrive at one batch cost per use number. But what we do is we make those raw data reports that list the individual usage by individual journal available to our colleagues on a shared network drive. So what they do is that allows them to get kind of a quick snapshot of like, okay, here's cost per use for the entire Springer package, but I want to see how this one journal is performing, so I know I can dig into the usage stats on a more granular level in that shared network drive.
In the same way, some of them will have, JR1 or, JR1 counter 4, but they'll also have a book report, section of it. So we really just have to download each report and kind of put them in a file together, like you said, on the network drive. And that way they can pull out either the book report or the journal part. So.
We have quite a few more questions. I apologize that we are not going to be able to get to all of them. There are questions about sushi harvesting. We'd love to look into that, but we haven't done so yet. Questions about choices we've made on metrics that we chose. I apologize that we don't have the time to dip into this, because I think y'all actually get like kicked out of this meeting within a certain number of time past our session time. So I just want to thank you all again. Our contact info is on this slide. You can also very easily find it on the UF Library staff directory. So I would love for you to contact me or us directly with these questions, and we'll be happy to get back to you. But thank you so much, everybody, for joining us.